We go. I think Michael is on. Woo! Let's go. Hey.
Ref, how you doing?
I'm feeling great. How about yourself?
I'm also good. Nice to talk at last. This is terrific.
Yes, fantastic. I'll be very honest with you. I've been waiting for this moment for ages, and I'll explain a few things exactly why that is and why I'm very so hyped for this. Thank you very much, guys. So let's get right into because no time is precious, and we've got 1 hour and 55 minutes. So let's get into it, guys. So
sounds perfect.
Hey, my name is Rav, and I'm the host of Coaching Leaders Podcast. When I've launched this podcast, I had one purpose: to help managers becoming coaching leaders. And I knew from the get-go that there's one guest that I have to figure out the way to get him on the show and have this conversation, because the value that Michael can bring into this purpose is incredible. Michael has written a phenomenal book called The Coaching Habit, which by many is regarded the best coaching book out there. I second that opinion, certainly the most sold in the 21st century, guys. Now, without any further ado, guys, Michael Bungay Stanier. How are you guys?
I'm totally great. Hey, what a nice introduction. Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's good to be here. And I'm happy to be part of this kind of mission to help leaders and managers be coaching leaders and managers, because if you can add that to the way you show up and make a difference in the world, if you add curiosity as a superpower to the way that you work, it makes your life better, and it makes everybody else's life better as well.
I mean, so essentially what we're doing is we're helping make this world a better place, right? By helping others become the best versions of themselves, we are contributing back to our society. And that's how I view the way I conduct myself. First, I work on myself to develop myself, because that way I can contribute more back to our society, because we can share the message. And I love what you said about the curiosity as well. I'm really curious, how did a lawyer ended up writing the best coaching book out there?
Well, I never became a lawyer. I did a law degree.
All right.
And I actually finished my law degree in Australia being sued by one of my law professors for defamation. So I knew that this wasn't going that well. It was interesting, when I was doing law, there are kind of two key streams to law. One is you need to know a bunch of stuff. You need to know the law. You need to know the details. And this was the part of law that I was least interested in and least good at. I mean, I just wasn't that good at it. But there was another part of law, which was the inquiry-based part of law. How do you figure out what's going on? How do you understand what the situation is? How do you examine or cross-examine somebody in court? And I didn't love cross-examination, because it was very you're setting people up to say yes or no to prove your point. But I loved the idea of mediation. And mediation is when you pull people together and you say, can we just work this out outside the law courts? And, I was like, it's interesting that the thing about law that most appeals to me is the thing that's nothing to do with law. So I was saved, I feel, from becoming a lawyer. I went off and I went to England and I studied in England. But the seed had been planted, Raf, as a teenager, in fact, because I had started training as a crisis counselor, a telephone counselor in Australia for teens who were, thinking about hurting themselves or suicide or something like that. And then when I started my career and I started interacting with people, I started seeing how that could come together. I was like, you know what, coaching can be a really powerful tool in workplaces. And then when I started my company, Box of Crayons, 20 years ago, I realized I just hated the way coaching was being taught to managers and leaders. It just didn't connect to what was real for them. So that kind of started me off on this vision to go, how do I unweird coaching? How do I make it feel like a really everyday practical tool for normal people?
Well, so it sounds like that curiosity was always a part of your life. And what you've just mentioned, I was trying to figure it out. How can I let you know why I value your book so much? And those questions are incredible. But there's something else. There's one more reason that really speaks to me. And for that reason, I choose you to be one of my Goliath. You don't know that yet. You know now. I'm competing with you every single day. And that's what, as a feedback coach, I literally, you're my challenge. And the reason for that is because your book, you can grab it, read it, and make it happen. And so I imagine myself, and I've been in this position, there's lots of managers who are not fortunate to have that coach-like leader around them, mentor-like leader around them, but they have the desire to do that, to be that one. And then, so where do you get support? You get certain books, but those books are not always as easy to implement because you're all excited, you go back to work, and then reality just punches you in the face and you're like, maybe it's not for me. When you get the coaching habit, you read it, you go there and you implement it pretty much straight away. And you can go back to it and figure it out if something isn't right for yourself. And so for that reason, I'm so appreciative of your book. And it serves me as a role model, as a role example.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, there's certainly a place for kind of bigger books on the theory of stuff. But I know that I am drawn to try and translate kind of ideas that can be a bit abstract to make them feel accessible and practical for people, and to try and give people the best chance of actually taking it on and using it. I mean, not everybody gets it like you do, Ralph. I mean, there's certainly a lot of people who've read the book and just like you gone 7 good questions, some good suggestions on how to ask a question well. I can kind of go from 0 to 1 in terms of stepping up, being more coach-like, kind of stepping up my coaching game. But I also know there are lots of people who've read the book who've gone, Michael, it's a good book, but I found it really hard to change and shift my behavior. And actually, that's kind of why I wrote my latest book, The Advice Trap, because the Advice Trap one goes a little deeper into behavior change. And it says, look, why is it so hard? Because, it sounds easy enough. Because, this is what I ask people to do. I say, look, this is the behavior. Can you stay curious a little bit longer? Can you rush to action and advice giving a little bit more slowly? And that sounds straightforward. And there's not that many people who disagree with that. There aren't many people who go, no, I don't think I should be curious. I think I should just crack a whip. So in theory, everybody gets this. In practice, some people commit and like you have seen the difference. Others have struggled a bit. And that's not their fault so much, but it means that they need to kind of come at the change process in a different way. And fundamentally, they've got to find out what they're holding on to now. What benefit do they get now from their current way of behaving that is bigger than kind of trumping the benefit they could get from this being curious? And that's kind of what I tried to explore in that next book.
Yes, it's a phenomenal one as well. So when I read your bio, you took me on the time travel journey to when you were 3 and you learned how to hop, and then you hit yourself with a shovel. So I would like to follow the theme and ask you if you could time travel with me back into 2006-07 when I was about to be promoted into management. I decided that this is what I want to do. So my life, leadership life and working life, it's pretty much divided in 2 things. Prior to that, I was an athlete. Then I worked, but I had no idea that the leadership exists. Like I was part of the environment when you clock in, clock out, top down, get it done, get paid, off you go home. And then I joined Hard Rock Cafe for the first time. I felt like I belonged, and I was introduced and experienced a leadership. And I decided, doesn't matter what I do, Raf, what you're going to do is to create the same thing to the person to your left and right. And that's, again, easy to say, easy to commit. How do you do that?
Yeah.
So let's just pretend for a second, I've been fortunate. I've met you early stages on my management career. And I say, hey, Michael, I'd love to coach people, but I don't know where to start. Could you walk me through those seven questions and almost coach me live, if you will?
Sure.
So where do I start the conversation with? So I want to coach my employee, and where do I start?
Well, here's what I would ask. I would say, well, Raf, I love that commitment. That's really good. It can be really helpful. There's lots of science that says being more coach-like and coaching your employees, it's going to be good for them and it's going to be good for you. Let me ask you this, Raf. When you've been coached well in your past, I'm hoping you have, if you think to that moment when somebody did that, is there 1 or 2 things that you noticed that person doing that really made it a good session for you? I mean, when you think of the good leaders you've had in your past, what immediately comes to mind about what they did well that had that impact on you?
There's 2 things that comes to my mind. One, they asked difficult questions that I didn't like at first. I just didn't like it. There was the answers weren't on the plate for me ready.
Right.
And so that they made me work hard for it.
Got it.
And number two for me is that they knew who I am as a person and where I want to head towards. And those two were the key ingredients, in my opinion, what helped me get the best out of me and make me work hard.
Perfect. So they're good at asking the difficult questions, the ones that don't give you the easy answer. And they also know you as a person. They don't just see you as a cog. They've got a sense of who you are and presumably kind of your strengths and your weaknesses and what you care about and all of that good stuff. And let me ask you a similar question. When you think of the leaders that were not that great, who were underwhelming for you, who let you down, what are one or two key behaviors that you would notice across them that were patterns there?
So first of all, I would have to get their attention. They never gave me the attention on their own intentionally, unless something went wrong. And they had those answers for me. I was told what to do without providing context and understanding why. So in other words, they asked me to replicate what they told me to do, which I would do until I struggled to understand why. And then my coaching would be because I was told so. So do it as well.
So like you've already got a really good map around the leader you want to be. Because in those four things that you mentioned, you've got things to do and not do that will move you towards being the better leader. Now, let me ask you this. One of the things you said your good leaders did was they got to know you as a person. Are there one or two things that come to mind for you about when you think about your team, how you might get to know them slightly better as people, how you can kind of make that connection with them? What would you do?
I think it's having ad hoc conversations. It's not that I was able to hire people that I want to. Those people will often hire it for me. So I wasn't able to ask certain questions during the interview process.
Right.
But then it would be listening to their stories and asking questions and figuring out what makes them happy. That's my starting point. What makes you happy? And then that gives me a starting point to have a conversation around certain things.
Perfect. I love that. What else? What else could you do to help get to know people? I mean, understanding what makes them happy is a really good idea. What else?
Another thing could be for me having more conversations, though not those informal, but a bit more formal and understanding them on a slightly deeper level. So those professionals. So there's the personal one, who makes you happy and makes you treat who you as a human being, as a person, but then start aligning it with what's your path like and connecting them slowly as we're moving through this process.
That's great. So you got some ideas around how you could get to know people better. One of the other things you said about the leaders who'd been good for you, had been good coaches, they asked good questions. And I'm a big fan of having like a few small number of questions to start with. You don't need 1,000 questions. You don't even need 100 questions or even 10. Like if you have 2 or 3 questions that you know and you like and you can rely on, that is a great place to start. It's like learning to paint with 3 colors. Like it actually teaches you a degree of discipline to have just a limited range of colors or in this case, questions to kind of paint with. So, when I started, I collected questions. I mean, I just kept listening for good questions that I really liked and they landed and I would write them down going, oh, I like that one. I'm wondering if there are 1 or 2 or 3 questions that you already know. These are coaching questions I really like. They seem to be powerful. They seem to work well with me.
So what worked for me well until I read your book is I was flipping the term of problem into challenge. So I would bounce back. Somebody comes to me and says, here we have this problem. And I would pause for a second. I said, so tell me what's the challenge? And I thought I'm doing well until I read your question that takes it 2 levels up.
Right.
But the challenge is the one for me, because for me, it's about facing the challenges and giving your best against them as a former athlete.
So that's really powerful, which is like you're moving from a kind of helping them move from almost a victim mindset. Here's the problem. Here's where we're stuck. To saying, let me give you some agency. What do you think's the challenge here? So really nice. What else? What else could you ask them? Is there another question or 2 that comes to mind? Questions that have landed for you in the past? So
the question that would land me from the past would be to ask them a question that would help them to explain to me what's the outcome that you're working towards. So what would you like to happen? How would you like to approach? And there's one more question that I often ask is, how does that make you feel like?
Beautiful.
So I like to talk a lot about sort of feelings rather than just hard metrics.
Got it. So like you've got all you need to step forward in terms of building your capacity as a coach-like manager, a coach-like leader. You know, a commitment to get to know them, a commitment to find out who they are as human beings, a commitment to not to rush into the easy answers, a good collection of core questions that you can use to kind of build insight about the challenge, insight about the process, insight about the person. Mm-hmm. You've got a lot of what you need. Now it's a question, you don't need much. Where mastery comes now is through practice. Mm-hmm. So my question is, you know, as you think of yourself as a leader and a manager now, where do you see the opportunities to be coach-like? I mean, is it in your one-to-ones? Is it in your every meeting? Is it every time you talk to them on the phone? Are there certain opportunities that feel more likely rather than less likely in terms of when you might be able to bring all of this to the conversation?
So in the past and right now, I always had this nagging of doing it almost on the spot in real time. And that's been instilled with me because I've done 14 years freestyle wrestling and I was competing and training. So I understand the need of doing it now because that's the best impact. But that's me.
Yeah.
From the experience, I think we know people trying to do it periodically. And I always say, sure. Well, if I do it every 2 months, or if the coach of the football team do the coaching session every 2 months, where would they be as a team, right? So my instinct always have been actually in the real time. However, I wouldn't be as mindful about whether it's the best time right now. And number two, the advice monster would be just getting the best out of me.
Yeah, I totally get that. Well, so that's helpful. And I'm with you on that. I think every moment has the opportunity to be more coach-like because it's just staying curious a bit longer. So I have as my default wiring too. Look, if I'm in conversation with you, whether that's in real time, whether it's through a screen, whether it's on email, I can still ask you a question, and that's bringing this commitment that you have. So, Raf, let me ask you this: what was helpful about this conversation? What was useful for you in it?
You've explored different avenues for me and different angles. It wasn't just sort of, just phrase it the best way, kind of to make, how it made me feel, is that you've explored different avenues for me and show me that although coaching is simple, there are different ways in which you can do it, and there is not one, the best way necessarily. I already have something in me that I can build on rather than taking on the completely new things and copy someone else's style.
Yeah. And for everybody who's listening in, one of the things that you might have noticed in that conversation, I mean, Raf goes, "Hey, Michael, you've written the book. You have the 7 questions. Coach me." But if you notice the conversation we've had for 10 minutes or so, maybe less, I really didn't give a single piece of advice. I didn't offer a single particular tactic. I have a bunch of knowledge about this. So it's not like I didn't have ideas that I could have shared. But one of the principles I have is if you're looking to make change, and when Raf asked that question, he's asking for, how do I change my behavior to shift in a different way? It's much easier to figure out what's already working well and how do we amplify that, rather than going, here's a brand new thing, can you take it on and try that out? So really my strategy in that conversation was, let's find out what you already know. Let's find out what you already get. Let's find out what you're already perhaps good at or you're starting to practice. And then let me encourage you to do that more, because if you've got a few good things that are already in place, then the thing we want to do here is just turn up the volume on what's already working.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful. One thing that I noticed from this conversation, that you're an incredible good listener. We haven't met beforehand. And what I said, you were able to go back to whether it was the last question or a few questions earlier that I've said to you. And I haven't noticed that you're making any notes. You're just having a conversation with me. And it's great to see it in action. My question to you is, how did you arrive to that point? Because that's not the easiest thing to do, I'm guessing, but I believe it's the necessary thing to do to be able to listen with that intent and connect the conversation between those dots.
Good question. So I'll come at it in a sideways angle. I often don't take notes, or I take very few notes, because I notice that as soon as I take notes, I lose the connection to the person I'm in conversation with. Because as soon as I put my head down and start writing, something gets broken in terms of the conversation we're having. And even though we've not met before, even though we're doing it through Zoom, and even though I can't even really look you in the eye because I'm looking in my camera, which is up here, you're actually down. If I was to look at you, I'd be looking down here. So I'm doing that kind of Zoom performance thing that makes you and the audience look like I'm looking at you, where in fact I'm not. So part of the way I do it is practice. Like, I've just spent quite a lot of years listening to people. And so I'm less distracted by the thoughts in my own head and the thoughts of anxiety about how I'm performing and what I should be doing and what do I need to know and what's the question I should ask. All of the things that can be distracting when you're trying to be present with somebody. I've just got enough experience through practice where I'm like, wherever this conversation goes, I've probably got something that can be helpful. And even if I don't, I'm not that worried about it. So I'm not like, oh my God, what do I say? What do I tell him? How do I add value to this conversation? I'm like, it'll be valuable.
That's what I'm battling. What do I ask next? How do I navigate through this conversation so I can totally resonate? I'm guessing it's for all of us. So your always was to tone it down and just stay as much as possible and just listen. And through that, questions will come up.
Be present. Secondly, I have learned that I need to remember less detail than I might think. So I'm trying to remember the 1, 2, 3, 4 headlines you gave me, not the minutiae that came with it. So it's not like I remembered all of our conversation. I just remembered, there was a piece about asking good questions. There's a piece about knowing the person. There's a piece about not giving advice. And there was a piece around, I can't even remember. And that's what I would say is my other tactic, which is I go, if you don't remember, you can just say, I don't remember. So I could go, look, you've done 4 things. I can remember 3 of them. I can't remember the 4th one, but 3 I've got, and you'll be able to tell me the 4th. 1, 2, 3. And the 4th one was, right, yeah, got it. So which of those is most important? So I just, my presence and my energy is what gives the strongest signal as to am I into this or am I not? Am I distracted or am I not? Am I on your side or am I not? It's less about what I say and less about the words I've got. It's more about, am I giving you my attention? Do I feel like I'm on your side? Do I feel like I have your back? My friend Mark Bowden says, people respond to the strongest signal in the room. So if you are the attention of the room, if you have the attention of the room, so if you're a speaker or a facilitator or a coach, part of your job is to put out the strongest signal so that the room responds to it. And here's the signal I want to give you. I'm calm. I'm interested. I appreciate what this conversation is about, and I appreciate you. That's the message I want you to get from my presence. And it doesn't really matter what my mouth is saying.
Wow, very powerful. I can say I was about to mention that your tone of the voice accentuates the presence with me. And I literally said it genuinely now. I can see how deliberate you are with it. And by saying the strongest signal doesn't mean it's the loudest one. Right? That is not to get confused here.
It's like it's the most focused of the signals. And for you and for everybody who's listening in, it's worth remembering that this is not inherently wired into who I am. This is learned behavior. This has come through practice. I mean, I was probably inclined to this way of showing up in the world anyway, but I've learned this. I mean, I've been learning it and practicing it. I remember back in university. So this is now, God, 30 years ago. It's ridiculous. And, you know, we'd be sitting around in a tutorial. It'd be like 10 of us. And I'd be the mouthy guy talking too much. And I just remember in a certain class suddenly going, you know, there's 10 other people here and 6 of them haven't said a word. 2 of them had said something. And then there's me and my friend Batch. We seem to be just doing all the chip talking around here. I wonder if it would be helpful if I just shut up a bit. Do I really need to be doing all the talking here? So it's been a learned experience. I mean, I've done training, I've practiced, and I've read about it, and I've just seen the value of sitting with somebody, being present, being curious.
Yes, the message that you keep on sending is that we can all learn that curiosity, and the trick is simply just stay curious for a little bit longer. And so let's just move a little bit to that advice monster, because when I was going, especially today, I was like, okay, so the 7 questions, and I tried to imagine myself go back in time when I was the manager. And I remember very vividly, there was one point when I was like, that doesn't work, Michael. What do you mean? I approached that manager, promising manager, growing, and So I was like, okay, so it's time for coaching. I'm going to use this format. And as soon as I asked him between those 2 questions, what else and what's the real challenge here for you, I got this blank stare. And as soon as he told me the first thing and the second thing, it was like, I don't know. And so literally I just felt like, I'm going to tell you what that is. And I'm like, but I'm supposed to be quiet. But if I stay quiet now, it's awkward. And it's like, how do I navigate through it? So let's just circle around that advice monster.
Well, how did you navigate through it?
I told him what I think. At that time, I couldn't. I wasn't ready at all. And sometimes I still can see myself not being able to stay present as you are. And I think for me personally, and for all those listeners over there, one thing that I had to work first on is how I'm coming physically across, impatient. That it was very transparent that I'm like, come on, man, why can't utter a word? What's going on here? And that just prompts that my physical cues prompt my impatience from the inside. And that's when you lose it, and you taking the stage rather than allowing the other person to have this conversation.
So what guidance would you give yourself now in terms of how to manage that?
The regulating my body language, but I'm not really quite excited anyway in the first place. But also understanding that it's okay that I didn't have all the answers. I was frustrated. It's a simple for me. It's a simple question. What else? I know 2 or 3 other reasons. Or I'm 3 layers ahead of you. You're not. And so understanding that we are at different path of our journeys. So for me, that what else? I can give you 3 more what else's, but you can't. Now, the same applies when I have conversation with you. I can have answer on the curiosity and I'm stuck around question number 2, what else? And you can go 4 more layers deeper. And it's because we are all at different stages of our lives with different experiences. So understanding of that for me is huge, but I didn't have it years ago at all.
Well, if I'm in this situation like that, there's a few tools that I have at my disposal that I might think about trying out and seeing if it will work. The first is permission just for the conversation not to work. You know, a coach-like approach is great, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it falls a bit flat. That's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be gloriously coach-like every time, because it just, if you set that as your standard, you just disappoint yourself and you drive everybody else crazy. So permission to fail.
Love it.
Because
didn't have it.
Well, because let's face it, a failed coaching conversation is not really a crisis. It's just, I could have done that differently and maybe better, and next time I'll have another go at it. You know, we learn from our failures. It's by stumbling we get better at the stuff. If it was easy all the time, you wouldn't grow, you wouldn't learn. The second thing I would notice is that how time is different for us depending on which side of the conversation we're at. When you ask a question, and what else? And there's not a fairly quick answer, time feels like it goes really fast or really slow. It's like oh my God, I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting, and it's awkward and it's difficult. And in reality, maybe 1 or 2 seconds has gone by, but it stretches on your side of it. Mm-hmm. So that's also useful to recognize, which is it might feel a long time for me. It may not feel like a long time for them. The third thing I try and remember is I'm you know what? However uncomfortable I am with the silence, they're probably uncomfortable too. And, a little bit of patience, they're probably going to crack before I am. So what if I just take another breath? Mm-hmm. Because I can see the difference between silence and them still being engaged in the question, and silence and they've kind of opted out of the conversation. And whether I stay in the conversation or not depends on whether they're still in the conversation or not. If I can see them trying to figure it out, I'm like, this is great. I'll sit here all day while you try and figure this out. That's you learning stuff. Mm-hmm. That's my whole purpose, is to make you smarter and more competent and more confident and make connections you hadn't made before. This is what it looks like. Beautiful. If they've kind of opted out of the conversation, they're like, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And kind of I don't care. That's harder because there's no easy solution to leading somebody who's a bit kind of passive aggressive and passively opted out of stuff. It's not like coaching unlocks the magic. It's difficult no matter what approach you're trying. So the first thing to say is there may be a performance issue that needs feedback and needs being directed, which is I need you to step forward and take responsibility and accountability for the stuff that's yours to solve. And saying, I don't know, doesn't work. And here are the consequences of you not changing your behavior. So that's not coaching, that's feedback. And, depending on how serious this is and whether it's a pattern and whether they're a fit, all that stuff, whether it amps up to them actually leaving the team or leaving the organization. Mm-hmm. But sometimes they're like, I don't know, it's too hard, but I'm not playing the victim. I'm just got a little bit lost.
That was the case with the person.
Yeah. So here's what I would say. It's you know what? This is a difficult question, but by the way, this is how I'm going to be leading you from now on. So I often talk about the process that's going on to kind of tell them what's up. So I'm going to just, by the way, this will become annoying, but it's going to keep happening like this, which is I'm going to keep asking questions because I need you to be figuring this stuff out because I want you to grow. I can see you've got great potential, but to fulfill your potential, you want to increase your capacity and your confidence to take on stuff like this.
Yeah.
So here's 2 things you need to do. First is you need to know that I've got your back. I'm going to help make sure that we get through this. So you're not on your own. I'm here with you. And I want you to take a good crack at this. So I want you to go away and I want you to spend 10 minutes thinking about this, or 30 minutes or a day. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to ask you to come back in 10 minutes or 30 minutes or end of the day or tomorrow. And we're going to have this conversation. And I want you to have 2 or 3 ideas about what the real challenge might be around this. And mm-hmm. we'll just kick it off again.
Sure. So if I was back in the management in my early stages, my guess is that conversation about this is how I'd be leading and coaching you should be right at the start before it happens, because otherwise I can see him thinking you've been sent away because you're not smart enough. Go figure out how to be smart and come back to me.
Right. That's true. But we often just don't have a nice clean start.
Yeah.
Because we're already partway down the journey with everybody we're working with. Mm-hmm. So if you go, I can only have these kind of set up conversations at the start of the conversation mm-hmm. and the start of the relationship. We're like, it's just never a good time for that. And you're right. There is never a good time for it. It's always slightly awkward. And you can just, it's like they say, we're interrupting this broadcast for a special announcement. You're like, I'm interrupting this broadcast for a special announcement. I'm totally getting into this coaching thing. So I just need to, I'm kind of having a meta conversation now about how we work together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really trying to give you less advice and to ask better questions. I've got your back. We're in this together, but everything I know is you get smarter, you get better, you get happier, you get promoted, you earn more money when you are figuring some of this stuff out for yourself. That's what I want for me, and that's what I want for you. So here we go.
Yeah. Let's just circle a little bit around this advice.
Sure.
Maybe it's the story in my head and the way of explaining to myself that I'm not giving advice ahead. I'm just being, a bit more coaching. So in that situation, what I tend to do is to take it on my own experience. And so what worked from my experience, and when I face a similar challenge, I've approached it from this angle and then maybe bounce it back. Would that be something that you'd advise to do so? Or maybe I'm just jumping ahead and I'm still giving advice rather than just being supportive? I remember from one of your talks when you said, when you stick the question at the end of the
question mark,
question at the end of the advice is just actually just you're not being
it's still advice. It's fake questions now.
Yeah.
So look, there is a place for storytelling and for you saying, hey, I walked a similar path and here's what I learned from that. It's often a bit naive to think that just because you did this once some years ago, that the answer is still the same.
Mm-hmm.
And even if the answer is still the same, it's a big question to ask whether that's the right leadership act right there and then. But one of the things that people who are listening in may have noticed from our conversation is I've almost never said, well, here's the answer. I've said, look, I've got some things. They may work, they may not work. Let me give you some options, and maybe there's something helpful here. We'll see. So I've been much more kind of like, let me lay down a few ideas on the carpet between us, and then we can look at them together and go, I don't know, is there anything useful here? What do you reckon? What landed? What, if anything, was helpful? And what I'm doing is I am removing my authority from the advice that I'm giving.
Yes.
Because what I'm aware of is the power structure that exists between me and the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm kind of old, I just will almost automatically be put into positions of authority, or I'll claim them for myself. I've written the coaching book. So people are like, Michael, how do I do this? I've started a company. So my team looks at me and goes, hey, Michael, how do I do this?
Mm-hmm.
And there's something lovely about authority and kind of being the one-up person, the smart person, the person who has the answers. It strokes your ego, but it also just stops stuff getting done. It stops the right stuff getting done. It makes you the bottleneck. It disempowers people around you. It just runs the risk of setting up all sorts of broken dynamics. So I deauthorize a lot of the advice and opinions that I have because I want people to be a bit skeptical about them. I'm like, yeah, I did this, but it was 5 years ago and it was in a different part of the country and it was a different part of the business, but there are some superficial similarities. So I'm happy to tell you the story, but gosh, there may be nothing here of value at all. And then I'll tell them the story and then I'll go and I'll literally say this is a script people can take. What, if anything, was helpful or useful here for you?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm giving them permission to say, honestly, Michael, nothing. There's nothing valuable here for you, for me. But I'm also saying to them, so now it's your job to extract the value rather than going, I've ordained that this piece of advice has value. I'm saying, what was useful? Take what's helpful here.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this is a long answer to your question, which is like, should you be telling stories? Should you be giving advice? I'm like, yeah, there's always a place for advice, just a little later in the conversation than you think. And when you do offer advice, offer it humbly, going,
Yes.
Here's some ideas. I don't know, maybe they're good, maybe they're not good. Take what's useful, leave the rest.
So it's not your way, it's the way. Is here's my experience I'm sharing. I hope you learn from it. And
yeah,
as you mentioned,
and there's a place when you're a leader where occasionally you go, it's my way, and here's my way. And I know it might not be right, but it's my job to make the call on this, and I'm making the call.
But then when you do that, it has the weight, because it's not typically you who's doing it, and it gives you a range. You've mentioned about those 3 colors at the beginning. Start picking 3 colors. Now, by doing so, you're expanding your own palettes of colors. So you can bring that authority when it's needed, and when you bring it, people are aware of it, rather than, like this shouting pattern. It keeps on shouting. It's just another shout. I just go through it, and and I get an angry manager who just kind of gets his way that way. All I have to do, listen here, goes there, and move on. When you bring that authority in the conversation, then it really means actually you've just accentuated, which brings me something interesting. Because today I had a conversation with my son. Unfortunately, I have not behaved in the way that I wanted, and I didn't show up in the conversation that I wanted. I have lost it, if I'm honest with you. And
it's obligatory as a parent that you let yourself down from your ideal. This is what I'm going to be like as a parent. So this is what I'm like as a parent. Because kids are, I'm happily child free, so I don't know what I'm talking about here. But everything I observe from everybody else, I'm like, kids are just there to press all of your buttons till you finally crack. So it's good. Your son is doing exactly what he's designed to do.
And so just to give a little bit of context, I asked him to, because Nathan is 16 and Xavier is 9, I asked him to pick up him for school because I got 2 episodes to record today, and it kind of collides. I mean, I would have to rush. And so I started with questions like, would you like to go and pick him up? And the answer was no, I don't want to. As in, I don't want to do that. And that just kind of like, I didn't get the best out of myself and allowed myself to get a little bit irritated. And but the conversation went down the path, and he said, you should walk in and says, I need you to do X and Y. And I said, you won't hear me phrasing things, I need you to do it, unless it's super, super important. And I noticed you've been using it several times. What I tend to do and work towards is to remove that I need you to do that, I want you to do that, because it's not about what I want and what I need, it's what's the right thing to do. This needs to happen for those reasons. Because the story in my head, and how I try to communicate and come across is, hey, like you said, I'm not right, and it's not about what I want. We're doing what's right. And the example that I'm using, like, I'm not telling you not to hurt and kill people because the law says it. You're not doing it for the right reason. So I told him, look, I'm not using I need you to do it. And if you hear me, it's super, super important. That means it's something that there's no conversations around it. I'm not willing to back down. But again, it gives me a palette of colors that, depending on situations, I can then use it and or not.
It's every relationship is different in terms of what the understanding is around how we communicate and how we talk about things. In my relationship with my wife, we work pretty hard at actually saying, I want this and I want that. There's a way of understanding the work I try and do, which is to try and build adult to adult relationships. And one definition I heard of an adult to adult relationship is being able to ask for what you want, knowing that the answer may be no. So it's giving permission for the person to say yes or no, but it's also encouraging people to be more explicit about here's my request. Here's the actual ask I have of you. Now, it gets complicated with family because there are power dynamics and stuff within a family. It gets complicated with teenagers because their brains are melting. So they're not that great at controlling emotions, rational thought. They're not good at actually thinking beyond themselves because their brain just doesn't have the capacity for that. It's literally going through a meltdown period and it won't get back to being the next version of their brain till their kind of early 20s.
Yes.
So the appeal to their rational, it's for the best of both of us and you're a contributing member to this family. It's a tough argument to make of a teenager. They just don't have the brain capacity to get that or act on that. So, you know, I'm the founder of a training company. I'm the CEO of a small development company. Part of my job is to give clear direction around what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to do it occasionally and thoughtfully. But when I want something, it's to make the clear request.
Exactly.
And for me, in that spectrum, it's not only when it's a non-negotiable emergency.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I'm ordering you to leave the house because it's burning down. It's also another thing. It's like I want you to do this for me. But that's when it comes down to the bigger point that I took from your story, which is with every relationship you're in, it's helpful to have a shared understanding of the different levels of communication.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is the wrong language, but it's like, is this a DEFCON 1 request, a DEFCON 2, a DEFCON 3, or a DEFCON 4 request?
Yep.
And what often causes tension is a misunderstanding of the level of the request. And if there's a way that you work on building the shared understanding of, when I make a request like this, here are your options in terms of a response. If it's DEFCON 4, I'm not asking for input or your opinion. It is a direct order and you need to follow it.
Right.
And I'm going to use that rarely. It's like when the place is on fire. But when I use that, I need you to hear it like that. If it's a DEFCON 2 request, I need you to go pick up your brother from school. It's like I'm using my parental authority. I'm open to a counter offer from you if something really important is going on. But the assumption I have is that you'll be doing the thing that I ask you, because it has to be a pretty good counter offer to trump this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just making this up as I go along, Rev. So
no, you're spot on. It's as you explain it. I'll in my mind, I'll go back to that moment and trying to contextualize everything. And you're absolutely right, and it's really helpful for me. I understand that, and you know, I always work hard on claiming my own responsibility for whatever happens. There is my responsibility. There's a role that I played. I may not like it, and I might feel like my instinct is to deflect it, but I need to slow down. And as you said, be a little bit curious about what's my responsibility and role within this conversation, other than just firstly go, it's them, it's that, it's whatever else.
It's part of the glory of being alive, is that you get to interact with other human beings who are thrilling and deeply annoying at the same time.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that I know that you stepped away as a CEO of Box of Crayons, and now you're working on MBS Works. Yeah. What's your journey like now? Where you're heading towards? Now I'm curious about your journey, and is there another book maybe in the works?
Yeah, I'm working on another book at the moment. It's very early days. Like, I've written less than 10,000 words. Now, my books aren't that long. My books are typically 25,000 words. So, but I'm in that writing the first draft, which is, you know, it makes you doubt everything about yourself. Do you have an idea? Can you write? It's a kind of a messy part of the process. But I've written enough books to know it's a messy part of the process. Your job right at the start of a new book is just to get words down on the page. Start practicing writing, because almost nothing that you write now will make it into the final book. But it's where you start, you know, to use a metaphor, it's almost like what you're doing here is priming the canvas of a painting. You're like, I'm putting on the whitewash that nobody sees and nobody will know that's actually there. But if I don't do this, the painting won't work. So I've just got to prime that canvas to get it ready for the painting that I'm about to make. So I'm priming it. I'm still trying to figure out what the book's about, and it's a little too delicate to share at the moment. So I'm not gonna say much more about it.
I'm happy to hear there's another book coming from you. That's
new book
already great
could
news.
be good, could be terrible. I don't know yet.
I'm sure it will be fun, for sure, right? Waiting for your sense of humor and your first two books. That's another thing that is incredible. Yes, it's packed with knowledge, but it's so easy to read, and I just laugh as I go through it. I'm like,
that's good.
Oh, it's so funny. Literally, it's just a joy to read them. So I'm sure whatever the topic is, I'm actually sure that you will inject a lot of humor into it because it seems like it's your style.
It is my style. I wrote down a few days ago what I wanted every chapter to have. And I'm like, I want every chapter to make somebody to have hopefully make them laugh. I want every chapter to have a memorable metaphor, something that kind of brings the idea to life. They can kind of see it. I want to be able to draw every chapter. So draw the model or the insight or something that symbolizes what I'm trying to teach in every chapter. And I want each chapter to be able to stand alone. So if you only read that chapter, it still feels like a valuable investment in something. So it's helpful for me to try and go, this is a kind of constant piece for me. I don't get overly seduced just by the content. The process, the structure, the context, that's actually what brings content to life. And if you think it's just about the content, then you lose it. I'm like, I'm building an artifact here. I'm building something that I want to strike chords with people in their head and their heart. It has to be more than just here's my idea. It has to have a life. It has to have a spirit to it.
Oh, you already sold me into it. I'll patiently wait. I will see
Good.
if it's
one book sold. Woo!
Definitely, you can count me on the pre-order. Now, I had one question. No, actually, sorry, I got two questions. I know I've got like a few minutes left.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what's the best coach-like leader that you worked for or with, and who that person is? I'm really curious to find out that.
Every leader that I've worked with and under has helped me grow. Some of them have been really good. Some of them have been really terrible. Often it's the terrible ones that accelerate your growth because you're like, oh, this person's winding me up, is diminishing me, is pressing all my buttons. And for me, that's a great opportunity for self-growth because I'm like, what is it about that person that's driving me nuts? What does that tell me about me? And what's my role in contributing to this broken process?
Yeah.
Because I'm part of the problem. So like is that person doing it to me, we're in a dance that is horrible. How am I letting down my part of the process? But I would probably just mention not actually a formal leader, but actually one of my teachers from high school, a guy called Tim Norfolk. He did a brilliant job at meeting the class I was in with the perfect energy. You're talking about the leaders you thought of, and they're like, they have the right questions. They saw me for who I am. They called me forth to be the best version of myself.
Yeah.
Well, Tim did that for this class I was in. It was a literature class. And I just loved going to each one of his classes because I knew I was going to be challenged and provoked. And he was British, so he had this great kind of dry sense of humor. And it just felt enlivening to be in that class. And believe me, there were plenty of classes which were not enlivening. I did Latin for 6 years, and there wasn't a single class where I learned Latin that I felt where I came out of it feeling happier than when I went in. But with Tim's classes, I almost always came out going, that was good.
Wow.
Yeah.
And having at school, tremendous. I wish I had at least one teacher like that. I didn't, but awesome.
I got lucky.
And there's one last question before we wrap up. Sure. And I have to change the way I ask it because you told me how to ask it better. So I was about to ask what was the most useful part of this interview for you. But now I know that I should ask what, if anything, was useful for you throughout this interview.
Well, I think what was most useful for me was just that brief conversation we had about the new book that I'm writing.
Mm-hmm.
And even just hearing myself speak to where I am in the process and speak to what I'm striving for in the broader sense of how it feels was a helpful reminder about what I'm striving for. So I think that was most useful for me. How about for you? What struck a chord for you?
For me, actually, is your presence. I've listened to quite a lot of interviews with you and watched numbers of your talks online, and I'm following the question of the day, which is curiosity next level. If you will, I'm genuine. I thought I decided to make curiosity one of my core values. I'm nowhere near where you are, and when I'm listening to your questions, I'm like, damn, what does he get from those ideas? But for me, it was as soon as I asked you about let's just flip the coin, let's just flip the script, and coached me. Your presence and tone of the voice and how you answered and posed and thought about the answers, that's a strong reminder for me. And sometimes I'm not sure whether I should question my own style, because I'm quite energetic by the nature, but I can see you can go either way,
right?
For whatever is needed. So that's very useful for me. I'll remember about it, and I will try to look from like a helicopter view on myself. Was I a bit more present, or my high energy caused a disconnection from here? Because not everyone is ready for that high energy that I often bring, and intensity. That's
exactly the right question, which is to ask, is what I'm doing serving the other person? I see a lot of people who are asking coaching questions in that kind of context. And I think about the question, I'm like, who's that most useful for? Is it for the coach, or is it for the person being coached? And if it's serving the coach, it makes me look smarter or know more or whatever, then it's still not that effective as a coaching conversation. It looks good from the outside, but you've lost an essential part of it. And same with the kind of the energy and the presence you bring to any conversation. It's like it needs to have that tension between being an authentic expression of who you are. Like I mean, what you see about me is how I show up always. I mean, this is the way I show up in the world. But I do have a volume knob, and I have kind of whatever those little levers are to make the bass higher or the treble lower or whatever it might be. So I can adjust myself to be the right version of Michael for the conversation that I'm in.
That serves the purpose to the person. I love it. Really good message to leave me with. I truly appreciate once again, Michael, for sharing your time and being generous with me today.
It's been lovely to finally have this conversation. Thanks for being such a great champion for the work. I really appreciate that as well.
Thank you. I'll leave all the relevant links and notes in the description of the podcast, because you guys have to follow it and read it. Even those curious questions of the day, like I've mentioned, they are incredible. That's learning on its own. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks. Cheers then. Bye-bye.
All right. That's about it with this interview. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been waiting for this conversation for so long. And before I decided to make this podcast, I wouldn't think I would have the opportunity to have a conversation with Michael, who has influenced my life greatly. Like I've mentioned, his Coaching Habit book shaped me, how I approach coaching life, and gave me huge inspiration to my work as a feedback coach. And today I had the opportunity to have this conversation, which is, I can't even express myself how I feel right now. A little bit tired and exhausted, I have to say. I wanted to stay focused throughout the conversation and match the intensity and be as good listener as Michael is, which is a bit exhausting, if I'm honest with you. I've got work to do, but that excites me. I choose him to be my Goliath for a reason. I choose to compete against him for a reason, although I'm not competing to win. I'll have opportunities to talk about it more in my other podcast called Mindset Conversations, and why I am phrasing things that way and why I choose to frame and reframe things that way, because it works for me, guys. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning in today, from watching those live streams. I really appreciate it, guys. Every support is really needed. Every like, share, comment makes my journey a little bit easier, and therefore I can contribute back to our society a little bit more. That said, if you consider being my patron, I would really appreciate that, because that would allow me to create more content for you. That's all for right now, guys. Meanwhile, have a good day on purpose.